Hey guys, Britt here. Welcome to End Times Bible Prophecy. Make sure to hit the subscribe, like, and share buttons. Well, this is number 300. What am I talking about? Well, I'm talking about this right here, this channel, End Times Bible Prophecy with Britt Gillette. This is going to be the 300th video that we put out. So I want to say thank you to everybody who's subscribed, liked, watches, has left a comment. You are appreciated. So we're going on almost 2 years now. The first the first video I put up was in May of 2022, but I didn't start regularly putting those up until July of 2022. But if we go back and look at those original posts, you can see, well, for those who remember who were around back then, I was in a closet for those videos. So, and if you don't know the story behind why I was in that closet, there's a video titled, "Why Am I Standing in a Closet?" And I will put a link to that in the at the top of the comments. I'll pin that to the top of the comments to this video so that you can go watch that. Hopefully, if you if God is compelling you, pushing you to take some sort of action in whatever endeavor in your life, maybe this will inspire you to move forward and take action now. Seize the day, guys. So, all right, so it's the 300th video. Today we're going to talk about the state of the U.S. economy. Where do things stand right now? Are we headed for a soft landing? Because that's what the consensus view in the mainstream media is. And of course, we know they always tell us the truth, right? So let's look at where things stand. And then we're going to look at the question of, well, is the stock market in a bubble? And I would say this probably applies to not just the United States, but all of Europe as well. Not necessarily China anymore. I think that bubble has popped. They were in one. But let's move right in and look at some of the data. So let's go to the Federal Reserve Bank of St. Louis. This is official government data. And let's look at the Bank Term Funding Program. So as you remember, this is a program that was just conjured out of thin air. If we go back and look at, this didn't even exist a year ago. Or a little over a year ago, I guess we should say. It started about a year ago this week. But they created this in response to the banking crisis from March 2023, the failure of Silicon Valley Bank and a number of other banks. And they said, well, you have all of these underwater assets. They're worth 70 cents on the dollar, but we'll pay you 100 cents on the dollar. We'll loan those to you for 1 year at a good interest rate. Well, that year is coming up. The Bank Term Funding Program officially ended on Monday. It was closed up. So we have our data as of Wednesday for the week from Wednesday a week ago to this past Wednesday. What does that show? Well, that shows that we saw usage go from 164 billion to 167. So another $3.4 billion was loaned out as part of this program that I thought the crisis was over. Why did banks need $3.4 billion between last Wednesday and Monday? Because that's not even for an entire week. And of course, as we see back here, well, March 8th, this was zero a year ago. But by the 15th, it was 12 billion. So as of today, and we don't have those figures, 12 billion under the terms of the program have been paid back as of today. So when we get this data next week, which they don't really release it until Thursday, 5 o'clock, around that time. So a week from today, we'll be able to look back and I would expect this number over here to decline by $12 billion. If it does not, what does that tell us? Because, are they trying to change the rules on us? We'll see. But if they do, then we would expect to see it decline by $79 billion by April 5th. Well, April 5th is not that far away, guys. We're talking, what, 3 weeks? 3 weeks. $79 billion essentially sucked out of the banking system. So the banks have to pay the $79 billion back. And in return, they'll get assets maybe worth, I don't know, $45, $50 billion. Plus they had to pay interest. So what does that do to our financially sound banking system? And if you remember, they brought up maybe 3 weeks ago, the Biden administration just put something out. They put out this press release, the banking system is sound. And people said, no, did anybody ask the question? So they know the banking system is not sound. I believe in the next couple of weeks, that's going to become very clear to everyone in the world. So what else is going on? Well, let's take a look at M2. This is currency supply. We're looking at year-over-year percentage change. The data they show us here goes back to 1960. But if we had the full data set, we would see that the last time that this happened was the Great Depression. So we're still negative. We've been negative year-over-year since December 2022. So well over a year. This means the currency supply growth has shrunk. So we have a shrinking currency supply year over year, and that is, by definition, deflation. Now, we had so much new currency injected into the economy due to the pandemic that it hasn't caused a depressionary condition in theory yet, according to the mainstream media. I believe we are in one. Typically, it's maybe a year after those begin that they look back and say, hey, did you guys know this downturn started a year ago? And most people go, yeah, we knew that. We don't need official government data to tell us that groceries cost twice as much, right? And that I just lost my job. I don't need data to tell me that. But here we have some more data. Personal interest payments. Speaking of cost of living, so this is interest people owe on their mortgages, on their car loans, on any debt they've taken out, the personal interest payments they're making. Look at that. And we know we've seen credit card interest at record highs at the same time that we're seeing credit card debt set new record highs month after month. It tells me people are really struggling to make ends meet, that they're putting basic necessities on credit cards. We've seen this in numerous stories where they talk about buy now, pay later. And I get these offers on, say, a credit card statement. I'll buy something, I'll pay for it in full, but they'll put on that statement, you could pay this monthly. Well, I could also just pay it all off, but it seems many people are struggling to do that, and that's not a good thing because that means they're paying a lot more than they have to. But if they have no choice because of the economy, that shows the state we're in. What about this? So this is data on net saving as a percentage of gross national income. So how much income are people saving on a percentage basis? As we can see here, it's negative right now. The last time it was negative would have been the pandemic, all of the shutdowns. And then before that was the Great Financial Crisis. And then they don't have data going back to the Great Depression, but I would wager that back in the Great Depression, it was negative as well. So all of this data is telling us the economy is not sound. Here we have a graph of gross domestic income. So this is how much income people have, right? And then overlapping that is gross domestic product. So the national income for the United States. Now, those in theory should be the same, right? And I think they should be the same unless you're manipulating the data that people tend to look at. Most most of the news reports don't report gross domestic income, they report gross domestic product. But as we've seen throughout the history of the data series, they've been pretty much the same. And now something's happening at the end. Let's take a close-up look at this. Here's the 5-year. Oh, this is diverged. Why is gross domestic product higher than gross domestic income? We can come up with our own ideas. I think one is the statistics are lies, right? The government's putting these things out there so that they can claim we're not in a recession when we are. But at the end of the day, we know that this data diverged really at the end of 2022. What did we just see before? We saw M2, the currency supply, started shrinking on a year-over-year basis in December of 2022. So since then, we've seen the currency supply shrink. That means deflation, and we're seeing this divergence between gross domestic income and gross domestic product. So, guys, all this media talk about a soft landing, it is not going to happen. And so here we have this. This is from Game of Trades on Twitter. They said, everyone is now betting on a soft landing. This also happened in 2000 and 2007. We all know how they ended. And so this is showing data of the number of times the term soft landing appears in news stories on the economy. As we can see, it's at an all-time high. The other two peaks would have been right before the great financial crisis, right before the dot-com bubble bust. But guys, this is, yeah, for those who were around back then, you pick up on these stories now where for, 2 years they've been saying, soft landing, there's a soft landing coming, there's a soft landing. And we talked about before that data we looked at that showed the percentage change in the Fed funds rate and how extreme it was. It looked like the side of a mountain. I said, it's no soft landing. They're going to fly the plane into the side of the mountain. Well, why would they be talking about a soft landing if everything's fine like they've been telling us? But this is what they do. This is the propaganda that gets put forward. And again, if you're around during the dot-com bust, if you're around before the great financial crisis, these same stories were circulating over and over. Soft landing, things aren't as bad as they seem. Oh, this housing crisis, no problem whatsoever. It's just a bump in the road. Those were all the stories that were fed out to people, and we all know what happened. About this, probability of a 2024 recession is at levels only seen 2 times since 1960. Both ended in severe economic downturns. This time is not different. So here we see the highest probability on that graph since the mid-70s and the early 80s, late 70s, early 80s. There were back-to-back recessions at that point that were very severe. So again, that doesn't mean that today's economic conditions will exactly mirror the economic conditions we saw back then. But when we take all of these data points together, they're painting a picture. They're creating a picture for us of what the economy looks like. And I think it looks a lot like this. So here we have this Zero Hedge article where it says Wall Street Journal tells readers to save money. Maybe you should just skip breakfast, right? So start skipping meals if it's, but the economy is fine. It's a soft landing. What are all you people complaining about? It's just skip some meals, right? And then there are all these other references to stories such as the Atlantic. In the Atlantic, they put out a story that said, inflation is your fault. If people are so mad about high prices, why do they keep buying so many expensive things? And then Bloomberg put one out that said inflation stings most if you earn less than $300,000, which, is most people, right? Here's how to deal. Take a bus, right? Don't buy in bulk. Try lentils instead of meat. You can tell that some young woke journalist wrote this social media post because, lentils instead of meat. And nobody said this would be fun. Well, they didn't warn us of this, right? They were telling us at the time, well, this is just transitory. There's nothing to worry about here. And then, of course, they get to save money. Maybe you should skip breakfast. So this is where we're at in the economy right now with the propaganda machine going full tilt. But what can you do? We all know the truth. Here's another Game of Trades tweet. It says, alert, cash is now more attractive than stocks. This last happened before the dot-com bubble crash. So this is saying if you had a 3-month treasury bill, the payout on that is higher than the 12-month earnings yield on the S&P 500 technology stocks. So you're better off holding cash for the first time since the dot-com bust. So this should give us, perk our ears up and think, is the stock market in a bubble? And the data seems to indicate that that is the case. Let's take a look at this tweet from Crescat Capital. It's talking about valuation extremes and believing we are on the cusp of a rare shift like in 1972 and 2000, where a monumental investment setup exists. So what happened at those times? So 2000 was the dot-com bust. Most people don't remember 1972, but that was also a market peak that ended very poorly. The market declined, I believe, 60% in the 1970s in that decade. And that was in the midst of runaway inflation, record inflation for the times. So really it was a huge crash in purchasing power terms. So you may have, or maybe it was down 40%. I'm sorry, not 60%. The market S&P from 1970 to 1980, I believe, was down 40%. But it was even worse than that because even if you had that 60% that you had in 1970, it would buy a whole lot less by 1980. So here they're showing prices and versus fundamentals. This shows Microsoft and Apple right now. This red line is free cash flow. That's an indicator of how profitable a business is, how much cash and profit is it spinning off. Because there's all sorts of accounting shenanigans you can do to say, well, we earned X number of dollars this year. Okay, well, where are they? Oh, we don't have them. We had to do this with some of those dollars and this over here, right? But free cash flow tends to tell the truth of how profitable is this company. And as you can see, in both cases, this is on a downward trajectory, yet the stock price is on an upward trajectory. That indicates overvaluation, and overvaluation that to the extreme, as we're going to see here in a moment. About this, so back in 1972, when we had that market peak, there was something called the Nifty 50, and these were the 50 blue chip stocks that just buy these stocks, go away. They dominate the market. No need to own anything else. These are just going to be the winners for the foreseeable future. You'll be set with your retirement if you buy these 50 stocks, the Nifty 50. Well, it was probably the worst thing that you could do. And this shows this chart, the share of the top 5 companies in the S&P 500 by market cap, by valuation. How much of the S&P 500 were they taking up? And as you can see, back then, the big 5 of the Nifty 50 were IBM, AT&T, GM, Eastman Kodak, and Exxon. And now it's Microsoft, Apple, Alphabet, Amazon, and NVIDIA. We saw something similar back in 2000. I don't know if that shows up on here. Yeah, Microsoft, Cisco, GE, Intel, and Enron, but not to the extreme we see right now. But when you have that, when you have a market that's dominated by just a few companies like we have now, they call it the Magnificent Seven now. It includes these 5 companies plus, who else would be in there? I can't remember. Facebook, I think, is in there. I think they call them Meta now. And Tesla, I believe, are 6 and 7 of these companies. But when you have that, you're setting yourself up for a huge market decline if and when those stocks begin to decline. And they will decline because, as we just looked at, this will be corrected by the market in the near future. And these are 2 of those Magnificent 7. The charts on the others, I am certain, look the exact same as this. Once the market closes that divergence and those companies decline in price, they make up such a large percentage of the S&P 500. Those just top 5 are 25% right now. You'll see a huge market decline. Here's some more data on that. This is from IsabelNet. It says market cap of the largest stock relative to the 75th percentile stock. And this shows that right now we're at a place that rivals 2020, 2000, before the great financial crisis, before the Nifty 50 fell. You have to go back to the depths of the Great Depression to find a period of more extreme market concentration. So a century of data, and right now we're at a worse point than we ever have been in the past century. That should tell you where we stand right now. And then, of course, we have this right here. This is called the Buffett indicator. So Warren Buffett, widely considered the greatest investor alive today, he has a metric to measure whether or not the stock market is overvalued. And what he does is he divides the total value of the stock market by the gross domestic product of the nation. So what's the output of the nation? What's the value of those companies? The value of those companies should be less than, so you want a number that's less than 100%. Where do we stand right now? Well, as of today, it's at 185.14%. And if we look at this, we see the red line is the S&P 500. The blue line is the Buffett indicator. Go back to the .com. Now, this data only goes back to 1980. But if we look back at the .com era, we would see that it was peaked at probably 136. Right now, we're at 185. But that's not even the worst. The worst time was around August of 2021 at 200. And many people would say, well, okay, we were worse off back then. Here we are 2.5 years later. Everything's fine. The world hasn't ended. Yeah, it declined after that. But now the market's back up. All's well, right? But that's a pattern that you don't necessarily want to see. And of course, valuation is valuation. History says this is going to revert to the mean. It's going to decline. It's going to go back down. But there's an interesting chart we can look at from Kevin C. Smith. It says the technical setup compared to 1929 combined with the valuation and market cap concentration similarities should be top of mind. So let's take a look at this chart. Now, I've got some issues with this chart. I don't think this is going to exactly play out this way. You look at the timelines, they don't exactly match. This is what, 14 months, 14 and a half months. This is 15. I don't know. I can't do math right now. And this doesn't exactly mirror, but as we see this peak. This was a peak that the market hit, I believe, September 3rd, 1929. And then we had a sell-off the Thursday before Black Monday. There was a rebound on Friday, and then it just dropped on Monday and Tuesday. The market fell apart. So we see this pattern a lot where you have a top, then a fall, then a bounce, and then it drops off a cliff. And what were we just looking at on here? We had this top in the Buffett indicator. This is over a longer period of time than what we're looking at here. But this very well, this peak right here, could be what we're looking at right here. And I would expect that that probably is how this is going to play out. Just my thoughts on it. Doesn't mean I'm going to be right. Again, I'm not a prophet. I'm just observing things. But if we have a banking crisis, and especially as we talked about in the previous video, if we had an escalation of conflict in the Middle East and oil facilities in Saudi Arabia were damaged, if Iran decides they're going to shut down the Persian Gulf, close the Strait of Hormuz, no oil is moving in or out, and oil prices spike overnight to double what they are today, that would cause a collapse of the financial markets. We would most definitely see this. Now, I don't know that we can see the 2-day drop we saw in 1929 or even the crash we saw in 1987, because since then all these circuit breakers have been put in and there's a limit on how much the market can decline in one day. But those who remember what happened 4 years ago with the market declines know that, well, it can decline a good percentage day after day after day. So I think the market is set up for this to happen. We see market extremes of overvaluation in the stock market. We see the beginnings of a new banking crisis taking hold. And of course, we see consumers stretched to the limit as they were during the great financial crisis. All of these things are going to combine to create a poor economic outcome, I believe, in the very near future. So where does that put us? I think right here. This is where the U.S. economy stands right now. I found Wile E. Coyote. Can't get that out. Very entertaining when I was a child. Not so much when the U.S. economy and stock markets decide to mimic this, because this is where we're headed, and we will know we are there when we see this, as we've talked about, this the 2-year, 10-year spread. When this goes positive, prepare yourself. It's time to, be prepared for all of these things to take place very rapidly. We would move, I believe that's when we'll see the market crash take place. Now, I saw an interview with John Rubino recently where he made a good point. He said, all of this stuff is inevitable. When you look at these trends and think the mean must revert, when we look at things like this, well, that will revert. It's inevitable. When we look at things like this will go down. That is inevitable. But inevitable doesn't necessarily mean imminent. The two are often confused. However, I believe in this case it is imminent. I still believe by the end of this month we'll see the banking crisis unfold. Again, $79 billion has to be paid back by these troubled banks by April 5th. That's a lot. And they're going to get back assets that are worth less than what they were worth when they decided that I want to give these to the Federal Reserve and get my loans to keep our bank afloat. So all of this is going to unravel this year, I believe, in the banks this month. So we will stay tuned and see how this all unfolds. I believe when this takes place, because again, it is inevitable, the reaction from the politicians is going to be to print currency to try to get us out of this. They'll say, well, people have lost their jobs. They can't afford to eat. Look at the prices of groceries. Oh, look at the price of rent. All the things we saw globally in response to the pandemic. Imagine that times 10. That's what we're going to see as a result of this. But of course, to do that, they'll say, well, we'll have to have this central bank digital currency in place. That will solve these problems. And we've talked about before why they'll say that. Well, it will give us 21st century ability to regulate the economy. Because we have 21st century bank runs now where people don't have to line up outside the door of the bank like they did in the 1930s. They just hop on their phone and transfer the cash, or whatever it may be. So we need to have 21st century regulations. We need to be able to use this currency to be able to see. We can uncover Ponzi schemes like Bernie Madoff. Look at all the people he took advantage of, and we would have known that that was a Ponzi scheme way early. If only we had this central bank digital currency. And of course, when the market collapses and a lot of these brokers go under, people will say, okay, that's fine. Give me my stock in Exxon or Coca-Cola or whatever it may be. And they'll say, well, there's a problem there. Because you see, for every share of Exxon and Coca-Cola and all the other stocks in the stock market, people owned 1.25, 1.3 shares. Because, see, we lent those out to people to sell short. And then when they sold it short, somebody else bought it. So they both think they own the stock, but they can't both own the same share of stock. And the guy who had, said he would pay it back, well, he's bankrupt. And the broker who made the trade, they're bankrupt. And the clearinghouse that was in between, they're bankrupt. So I guess I don't know what that means. And then Wall Street will move in and say, oh, we have these rules in place that you can read about in The Great Taking. We're set up for that, guys. And of course, the government response to that will be, hey, we'll restore all of this. We'll cash settle this. We can't guarantee you we'll get your stock back. We'll get you back the cash value of that stock in central bank digital currency. And then if you want to go back out and buy that stock, so be it. They'll promise to put new rules in place. It'll be the same thing. They won't eliminate this shorting process as they've had it put in place. But as this is where we're headed, we're gonna head into a financial crisis with market crashes, a depression. I believe it's going to be akin to the Great Depression in severity, but not in length. They will roll out all of these programs to save everything, including the central bank digital currency, and they will be able to create as much of that as they want. And of course, the politicians will be so in fear of losing their jobs, they'll be making promises. Oh, you don't have to pay your mortgage, you don't have to pay your rent, you don't have to pay your student loans. You don't have to buy your own groceries. You don't have to, people can't pay their electric bill. We should pay that too. And they'll be handing out all this currency. And what does that mean? Well, that means on inflation, that's what they're going to be hoping to create. That's what in a deflationary spiral you want to create, but they will overshoot that. And we will end up with hyperinflation, but that's down the road. That is not today. That's not this year. That's down the road. Right now, the concern should be deflation and bank closures. We talked about bank holiday. Back in 1933, they shut the banks down while they tried to figure all this out. I think we're headed toward that point in the near future, a credit event where we see the banks close, credit comes to a screeching halt. That is the oil, the lubricant in the machine that is the global economy. So the world basically runs on two things: energy, mostly oil, fossil fuels, but energy and credit. And you take away either one of those things, you're going to have major problems in the economy. So when that happens, when the credit freezes, it won't be permanent, but there will be two to 3 weeks where everything will just sort of stop. even more than it did 4 years ago. And when that happens, you want to make sure you have a deep pantry, because that means the trucks won't be going to the grocery store or the restaurants. So if that's what you depend on every day you go to the store, every day you go to a restaurant, I would make sure that you have a deep pantry. Again, you don't have to have 10 years of food. I'm not saying that. But I would be prepared for 2 to 3 weeks of an empty grocery store and restaurants with no products. So that's my thought. What are your thoughts? Leave your comments below. Let me know what you think. Thanks for the 300th episode. Hopefully more to come. Although I wouldn't mind if the rapture occurred today and there were no more episodes. So, but let me know what you think. Leave your comments below. Make sure to hit the like, share, and subscribe buttons. And God willing, I will see you on Monday. Bye. If you want to learn more about the end times and Bible prophecy, make sure to sign up for my free monthly newsletter and get your copy of my free ebook, 7 Signs of the End Times. Just follow the link in the description to get your free book. Also, make sure to check out all of my books. Just look up Britt Gillette on Amazon, Barnes & Noble, Apple iBooks, Google Books, Kobo, or anywhere books are sold. Thanks for watching today, and until next time, keep your eyes fixed on Jesus, the author and perfecter of our faith.